Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Office Bloke Aidan.
I'm Gaynor.
I'm Sophie.
Today we've got 9 left in the Operation Yellow Ribbon. Do you have any idea?
I think it's when all the planes had to go somewhere and they went to Gander, Newfoundland. And it was a tiny little airport.
Can't hold that many planes.
That couldn't hold that many planes, but they had to put them somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We're going to do this
true.
video in 2 parts as well, by the way.
It's quite long.
It's quite a long video, so we don't want to be sat here and have like an hour long video. So we'll do 22, 25-minute videos. It probably will be.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah. You ready?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm ready.
Mentioned earlier that Tom Brokaw had an extremely compelling piece, so without further ado, Tom Brokaw.
Now, this devastating earthquake in Chile is a reminder that when one country gets in trouble, it really does depend on the family of nations for help. That's been especially true between this country, Canada, and the U.S., of course. The ties between the United States and Canada are long and enduring, and not just in good times, it turns out. On September 11th, 2001, the people of Canada came to our aid, managing an unprecedented crisis in the skies. They also took care of tens of thousands of displaced passengers who arrived at their doorstep on short notice. This is the story of one small town that didn't get the attention it deserved in the chaotic aftermath of 9/11 in so many ways. It symbolizes the grace and the unselfish spirit of this very generous nation. September 11th, 2009. This is a scene that has played out in communities for 8 years since the terrorist attacks of 2001. But what makes this ceremony different is where it's taking place. This is the Appleton Peace Park near the town of Gander in Newfoundland, Canada, where during the tragedy of 9/11, there was a bright light on the better part of our humanity.
It's a beautiful, beautiful thing that has happened here, and we know that no matter what happens in the world, there are still good people.
If this place can be somehow shared with the world would be a much better place.
Here in Gander, amid the heartache, an autumn romance blossomed. Here, parents were constantly consoled as they faced wrenching pain. Here, thousands of stranded Americans would form a lasting bond with everyday Canadians who acted with admirable, unwavering kindness. We can never again look at the New York skyline without remembering that day, September 11th, when terrorists hijacked airliners loaded with passengers and jet fuel, flew them into the World Trade Center and killed 3,000 people, altering the lives of an untold number of others. Most of our attention that day, of course, was focused here in New York, but it was a story that reverberated around the world, and it had a special impact on a small Canadian town 1,000 miles north of here, a town that became a safe port in a storm of fear, terrorism, and uncertainty. The province of Newfoundland and Labrador, a former British colony that did not join Canada until 1949, has long been considered Canada's poorest. It is largely populated by descendants of Scots and Irish, living simply in often harsh conditions. Here, neighbors relying on neighbors is a necessity of everyday life. Gander, population 10,000, is a small, 2-stoplight town in the northeast corner of the island of Newfoundland. Claude Elliott has been mayor of Gander since 1996.
We only have 500,000 people on a massive island. We've come through some difficult times, and most Newfoundlanders survive with hard work, helping each other, and that's been passed on from generation to generation.
The cold season can come quickly and severely in Newfoundland, but September 11th, 2001 dawns warm and sunny, a typically bucolic day that will be anything but typical as Gander is about to be thrust into the catastrophic events unfolding 1,000 miles to the southwest. Its citizens to be challenged as never before.
September 11th, 2001 started as a normal day in Gander. While we were having coffee, someone said there was a plane that crashed in New York in one of the Twin Towers.
We had complaints of speeding on Airport Boulevard. It's the only 4-lane road that we have, and I was parked in front of the curving club. I had my car radio and I heard what was going on. And like a lot of people, I couldn't believe that this was happening. And I said, that can't be true. It just can't be.
It is such a pretty morning, isn't it?
Perfect fall morning.
On that September morning, air traffic control veteran Ben Sliney is on his first day in his new position as FAA National Operations Manager. Barely an hour into the workday, there is an ominous development.
We were trying to locate American 11. It had shut off its transponder and dropped below radar coverage.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the book is called Hughes. We want to go live right now and show you a picture of the World Trade Center.
A plane has just crashed into the World Trade Center here in New York City.
We saw what appeared to be a fireball at the top of the World Trade Center.
We had reports of another aircraft that had deviated from its course.
Oh, another one just hit. Something else just hit.
U.S. officials say it appears it was a third plane that hit the Pentagon.
I ordered a national ground stop, meaning that no other aircraft could take off. Whatever's necessary. Just get them stopped now. I don't want any more planes on their frequency taking off.
56 minutes after the North Tower is struck, an unprecedented decision has been made. Every non-military plane must land immediately. For the first time ever, American airspace is closed. This is war. This is a declaration and an execution of an attack on the United States.
The only way to really sort the situation out was to land everyone in our airspace.
The FAA now says that all international flights headed for the United States are being diverted to Canada. Every day, as transatlantic flights enter and leave North American airspace, they are managed here, the Area Control Center in Gander, Newfoundland.
Gander 1174 Center, good day. Clear to descend to maintain 6,000 feet.
On September 11th, when U.S. airspace is shut down, there are almost 400 planes carrying tens of thousands of passengers westbound over the Atlantic. Around 200 are close enough to return to Europe. 167 more are too far across the ocean to turn back. When did you begin to be aware of what was about to happen in Gander? The flights that...
Can you imagine the panic of all those planes in the sky and knowing what to do with them? Mm. Like thinking, where am I going to send these? You know, this is closed, where are they going to go?
Yeah.
And they're all up in the air. You can't just circle them, can you?
No, exactly. They'll run out of fuel eventually, won't they?
Yeah.
Well, that's what I mean. You've got to get them to the nearest.
Yeah.
You'd be annoyed as a passenger as well, landing somewhere you weren't even going.
That poor guy on his first day at the job.
I know, yeah.
Talking about being thrown in at the deep end. God.
I know. It's scary.
Had been crossing the Atlantic more than halfway. Many of them were going to be headed for Gander and St. John's and Halifax, but Gander would be the big magnet.
I knew that the Canadians were going to get an onslaught of traffic, and I suppose I hoped that they'd be able to handle that traffic.
60 north, 20 west.
The responsibility of handling the traffic falls to a small team led by Don O'Brien, the supervisor on duty at the control center for NAV Canada, the Canadian version of the FAA.
The arrival sector, we normally would have 3 controllers seated. We quickly went to 14. We train for emergencies, we train for bomb threats, but usually it's a single airplane or maybe a second one maybe, but not to this level. The activity was going on here.
Was another part of your mind thinking about what had happened in New York and the possibility that there were more terrorists out there?
I'm sure it went through the controllers' heads, it went through my head, but sure, some of those airplanes could have been missiles. We didn't know how extensive this was, but that wasn't our call, really. We just had to get those airplanes on the ground safely.
One of the pilots approaching Newfoundland is Beverly Bass, the first female captain at a major airline. She's flying American Flight 49 from Paris to Dallas with 170 people on board.
From the controller's standpoint, they feared that another airplane was going to be taken down. Some of the airplanes were given directions to turn around and go back to their departure city. So we're sitting there cruising westbound and looking out the window, and you can actually see them turn and make 180s and head back to Europe.
Newfoundland is an island located off the eastern edge of North America. The 167 planes approaching Canada all must land immediately. The vast majority at small airports around the island and in the nearby maritime provinces, all controlled in Gander. Over the next 7 hours, Gander Control and the surrounding airports will handle unprecedented traffic under extreme emergency conditions.
Gander, Air India 113, we go to Toronto.
The Air India 113 Center, negative. You must now land at Gander. Turn right heading 320.
Roger, turning right heading 320.
Flight paths must be recalculated in 3 dimensions, accounting for speed, direction, altitude. Some planes are too heavy to land and must jettison fuel. The risk of collision is ever present. This is an actual radar tape from that morning. Now you're starting to turn them toward Gander.
Yes, we got the word, of course, and we had to heel them all northward into Gander, St. John's, and Stephenville. Some of them knew there was activity going on in Kennedy, and there was a crisis in American airspace. Some of them didn't. We were telling them, look, you got to land. And they're saying, no, we're going on to Kennedy or Dallas or wherever. They said, no, you're not.
In the air, as they learn the shocking details, captains worry their own planes could be carrying hijackers, forcing many to hide the truth from their passengers.
Our captain came on the PA system and announced that we had a slight mechanical problem, something to do with an indicator signal or something like that. We were going to have to put down in Gander to have it repaired.
Shirley Brooks Jones is a retired fundraising administrator for Ohio State, returning home from Frankfurt, Germany, on board Delta Flight 15.
Once we got parked, the captain came back on the intercom, apologized to us for the ruse, and said actually the equipment was fine, but there was a national emergency in the United States.
3 aircraft that we know of were commandeered. One was crashed into each of the World Trade Center towers in New York City, and another was crashed into the Pentagon outside Washington, D.C.
Apparently some type of what would appear to be maybe a terrorist activity or hijacking has occurred with airplanes which apparently have impacted the World Trade Center in New York City.
On September 11th, 8 domestic flights.
Imagine having to find out like through a plane.
Yeah.
Speaking
and
to
obviously
them.
that's why they're waiting until I've landed, because otherwise it would have just been mass panic.
Yeah. Because like they said, they didn't know if there was
If
anyone else like on any other planes. Like you know, like they didn't know.
They didn't. Yeah, they didn't know how many planes there was, because I think it was one of the planes that was going over towards the Pentagon. I think.
Yeah, there was another one there.
Yeah,
Wasn't there?
they had passengers who found out about it and were trying to take down the terrorists that were on board.
No, really.
So, yeah.
Scheduled to land in Gander. Instead, 38 planes carrying almost 7,000 people are beginning to fill the tarmac. The spectacle has drawn a crowd from among the town's 10,000 citizens. Oz Fudge is one of just 2 officers on the local police force.
I watched the plane come in, then I seen a jumbo come in, and then I seen another one come in, and I'm looking at this and I'm saying, holy God! If there's 200 people on each one of these planes, and we're going to get 40 or 50 planes, that's an awful lot of people.
Less than 2 hours after American Flight 11 strikes the North Tower of the World Trade Center, the skies over the United States are empty. For the first time, American airspace is completely closed. In Canada, the Gander Area Control Center somehow lands all 167 planes without incident.
It was a sigh of relief. You wipe your brow, you thank God they all got in safely, and it was unbelievable to go from this horrific activity, and then the airspace is completely sterilized. Nobody there. No targets on the radar screen.
Here in New York, the sad task of the search for the survivors and the victims goes on and on. In New York, citizen volunteers are flooding toward Ground Zero as emergency workers search for survivors. 1,000 miles from the destruction, the 10,000 residents of the peaceful Canadian town of Gander, with virtually no time to prepare, must also respond with countless acts of generosity, providing food and shelter for thousands of frightened passengers, strangers who have suddenly arrived at their door. Among the stranded, far from home, are the parents of a New York City fireman. Not knowing if their son is at Ground Zero, Hannah and Dennis O'Rourke fear they may never see him again.
Thousands of transatlantic flights underline the strategic importance of Newfoundland's airports.
Gander was an airport before it was a town. In the late 1930s, British and American military officials chose this site on the eastern edge of the continent to build the largest airport in the world. During World War II, this was a takeoff place for American military aircraft headed for the European theater. After the war, Gander continued to play a vital role as a refueling stop for transatlantic commercial airliners. But then, the jumbo jets came along. They could cross the Atlantic non-stop, and Gander's role in aviation was greatly reduced until September 11th, when Gander came alive again, a safe harbor for the jumbo jets that had almost put it out of business. And within a matter of hours, this vast tarmac was filled with planes from around the world, parked wingtip to wingtip.
Canada is basically becoming a gigantic runway for every plane and aircraft that was destined for the United States today.
In Gander, no one is allowed off the planes until customs and security are in place. Run by airport.
I was just going to say, that's another thing. You've got all these planes, all these people, and you just want to get them off, get them to a place of safety. But you can't, because you've got to make sure that every single person is legit. Like, it could be opening a whole new can of worms in a different country.
Yeah. Because that's the thing, customs in general, when you're going through, like, like Manchester Airport, even now, you've got to wait quite a while, like, it's quite chaotic, innit?
Yeah, even like when you're checking in, you still to this day, you have to take your shoes off.
Yeah.
Like, your belt off, everything. It's like, you do it because you think, right, it's the safety of others, but it's such a pain to do all this stuff.
Yeah.
Well, all those people, and you've got to check every single thing.
The worst thing on after a plane is like when you've landed, but you can't move anywhere after, like, they've just stopped and like, they're not letting you off for like a decent amount of time, and imagine how long you probably would have waited there.
I know,
as well.
And especially because,
and then
like,
you're getting
the
off and
panic
you're not
as
even
well,
at where you want to be.
Well, exactly, you're not where you want to be, and it's not like you can just sit there and read your book. You'd be so panicked, and like be thinking, what's happening? Is there someone on my plane?
And there's probably a lot of people on that plane or on those planes that were coming to visit somebody in New York.
Yeah.
And you don't know whether they're even going to be there when you get there. It's like crazy.
I know.
Officials and officers from the regional headquarters of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Mounties. They must process each passenger, plane by plane, until authorities are certain there are no terrorists on board. Among the trapped passengers is New York State Police Officer George Vitale, who is returning from Ireland, where he was doing advanced security for New York Governor George Pataki.
We were on this plane for 19 hours, sat in the tarmac, not really knowing what was going on outside, but knowing that it was pretty horrific.
The number of casualties will be more than any of us can bear, ultimately. And I don't think we want to speculate on the number of casualties. The effort now has to be to save as many people as possible.
There is another New York couple on the Gander tarmac whose connection to the events back home couldn't be more personal.
I just wanted to get off the plane and see what was happening, because I was hoping my son wasn't working that day.
Dennis and Hannah O'Rourke have been visiting relatives in Ireland. When they learn what has happened, they fear for their 44-year-old son, Kevin O'Rourke, a firefighter from Rescue 2 in Brooklyn.
I guess it goes back many years to when I was a kid. The apartment building I lived in, over the years I was there, it ended up having 3 different fires, so I was carried out as a child by a firefighter. So I have fond memories, I have memories to go back to, all of a sudden, in the smoke, this big guy comes up, grabs me, and carries me down the stairs.
When he was going for his fire test, and he said, "Mom, you pray for me." And I said, "Yeah, Kevin, yeah." He said, "Pray for me to pass." I said, "Yeah, Kevin." So he missed it by, 1 or 2 points, and he came home that night and he looked at me. He says, "You didn't pray for me. I didn't pass." I says, "No, Kevin, I prayed for you, you'd fail." So he says, "Mom, that's all I want. That's my calling, is to be a fireman."
While the desperate rescue operation continues in New York, Gander begins the process of absorbing all those passengers. So many that in a matter of hours they will nearly double the local population.
Now, Gander is a town of barely 10,000 people. There was over 6,000 of us. Now, if you extrapolate the numbers, New York City is 8 million people, so what's that? 6 million people showing up on your door saying, "Okay, we're here, do something."
The painstaking process of registering and removing each passenger continues through the night.
Finally, we're free, we're free. We're on the ground after more than 24 hours. We have no idea where we're going, but we're going.
Long time, right?
It is not until noon on Wednesday, September 12th, when the last passengers are finally allowed into the Gander terminal. They are exhausted and confused, most not knowing where in the world they have landed.
We're going to bus you into Gander, which is just a few minutes away. We're not sure when the FAA is going to open up the United States to travel again. The Department of Transportation in Canada has all air traffic in Canada shut down right now. When you see the footage of what has happened, you'll appreciate why things have been done the way they are.
Does it say how long that they were kept there?
Well, that guy just said on a video, like, we're finally on the ground after 24 hours.
But I think that was probably when they set off from wherever they were.
No, but surely it shows rows and rows and rows of beds, so they must have kept them there overnight. But I wonder how long they were kept there until they were allowed to leave Gander.
Yeah,
I'm guessing we'll find out in part 2, but
I'm guessing a fair few days.
I would think so. Yeah, to sort of transport and
to figure out what's happened as well.
But also you've got obviously they've got all the beds, but they're not going to have enough food and
and like toiletries
for them. So how did they get? They would have to come over on a boat or by road, or because obviously the airspace was closed, so they can't fly them in.
Well, how long was it closed for though? Like you might have opened up like the next day.
I think it was about 2 days, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Pretty mad though, eh?
Yeah. But we'll watch part 2.
We will get back to it again.
Yes.
Maybe
very interesting.
probably come out tomorrow or the day after.
Probably, yeah.
One of the two anyway. Won't be too long.
Yeah.
Hopefully, you like the video, like and subscribe, and come back for part 2. Catch you on the next one. Cheers.
Bye.